Phoenix Lady here. As we begin part 3 of this Pioneer Mountains Scenic Byway and More video, we finally reached Dillon, home of Western Montana College. My camera battery died at this point, so we had to arrange to charge it up again using a 115-volt converter we had set up just for this eventuality. I lived here from 1969 to 1972, then again from 1983 to 1988. During my first stay, I attended Western Montana College, then a teacher's college with not a single course in geology. Since I left following my second stay in the mid-80s, Western has morphed into University of Montana Western. According to Roadside Geology Montana, second edition, quote, "It's now an experiential learning campus that uses immersion scheduling to teach students through hands-on practice. Dillon is also the summer home for up to 30 geology field camps. Participants from around the globe come to Dillon for the tremendous geological diversity and access to public lands," unquote. Kind words from Dr. Robert C. Thomas, co-author of this edition of Roadside Geology Montana, but then he is a professor here. While Dillon was founded by the Union Pacific Railroad and named for its then president, for relatively easy access to the gold and silver camps in Bannock, first territorial capital, Argenta, and Virginia City, second territorial capital, the big resource being mined in the area is now talc. A lot of talc deposits are contaminated with asbestos, which makes them essentially worthless. Those in the Ruby Range are in Archean dolomitic marble and have no asbestos in them. Meanwhile, the Dillon volcanic bluffs on the other side of the Beaverhead from town, the ones with the M and the B for Beaverhead High School, are of Eocene to Miocene age. Visible between them, we can see part of the East Pioneers, snow and all, as we prepare to follow a mower onto I-15 north. I couldn't resist taking a look over my one-time hometown toward the Ruby Range in the last clip.
You have to go over the bridge.
As we headed up Highway 41 toward Twin Bridges, we could see the tailings pile for the Regal talc mine up on the pediment east of Dillon. In the pan around to the north, we can see the higher northern end of the Ruby Range, followed by the Tobacco Root Range, then the Highland Range with Table Mountain. The next clip shows McCartney Mountain. No, it wasn't named after the famous beetle, with the hogback in front of it. The last clip seems to be the snow-capped peaks of the Eastern Pioneers, possibly with Sugarloaf Mountain just visible for a second at the north end. At the historical point just south of Point of Rocks, also known as Beaverhead Rocks, apparently in error according to the Shoshones, I took a 360-degree, more or less, pan from west around to south. First, we see the East Pioneers, followed by the Hogback with McCartney Mountain behind it, then Block Mountain, a 46-million-year-old lava flow. The Hogback is a steeply overturned anticline cored with Pennsylvanian Quadrant Formation, according to Roadside Geology, Montana. In other words, it's the same formation we saw at the top of Badger Pass in the last video. The relatively low ridge in the foreground rising to become Point of Rocks is a prominent exposure of Mission Canyon limestone, part of the Madison group of Mississippian age. Just a note here, while this group of Mississippian rocks is called the Madison group across Montana, the Dakotas, Wyoming, and Idaho, at least, it is so widespread that it has other names across the Rocky Mountain region, as well as the Plains states and across the Mississippi Basin, all the way to the Appalachians. For instance, in Colorado, it's usually called the Leadville limestone. I just find it fascinating that in every roadside geology book I've read about Mississippian limestones, they have different names, but that's not surprising. It's just that if you put everything you read from the roadside geology books together, you get an amazing view of what this continent must have looked like at different points in deep time. And studying geology sure puts the events of the day in perspective as not even visible within the 4.6 billion year span of Earth's existence. Anyway, the pan continues with the Highland Mountains, with Table Mountain and its snow, then across the low area of the Jefferson River Valley to the ice-chewed tobacco roots, with 43 peaks over 10,000 feet high. After the tanker truck passes, we see the high northern end of the Ruby Range, Archean rocks to the south, flanked by Paleozoic rocks to the north. The final clip shows my brother looking at the information about the area around Point of Rocks, but what I really wanted to see was those white birds out in the pond. I thought they might be swans, as I've seen them as well as egrets and possibly whooping cranes here in the past. But no, these are actually pelicans. North of Point of Rocks, we cross the Beaver Head River and head north across the very flat, marshy floodplain toward Twin Bridges. The second clip is Table Mountain in the Highland Range. The third clip shows the oddity of sagebrush, usually a dryland shrub, growing in what appears to be marshy ground. I remember the area being drier back during the mid-80s, last time I lived in Dillon. Nothing is mentioned in roadside geology about the change in the landscape here, but it does appear the water table is rising. The last clip shows the combined Beaverhead and Ruby rivers flowing from east to west to join up with the Big Hole River a few miles further on from Twin Bridges to become the Jefferson River. But we aren't going that way today. We're now headed southeast toward Sheridan. The first clip shows the wedge-shaped north end of the Ruby Range, with the eastern pioneers visible in the distance. The second clip, as we enter Sheridan, shows the flatirons of Mississippi and Madison group rocks leaning up against the core of Archean rock. The break-in slope at the base of the mountains, both here and on the western side, is the Western Ruby Range Fault, a normal fault lifting the range above the grabens, serving as river valleys. This fault is very young, according to Roadside Geology Montana, as it cuts through the 6 Mile Creek gravels, deposited up until about 4.5 million years ago by northeast flowing rivers of the ancestral Missouri. If the Ruby Range had been here then, it would have blocked those streams. The last clip is of the Gravelly Range, mostly more Archean basement rocks behind Alder, where the road turns east toward Virginia City. As we head up Alder Gulch, most of the gravel ridges that are dredge tailings are overgrown by brush now. Between 1863, when gold was discovered here, and 1889, an estimated $90 million in gold was recovered from what was known then as the River of Gold. That would be the equivalent of about $40 billion today. Shows what inflation can do to currency. For some reason, I was more interested in the volcanic outcrops along the west side of the gulch than the tailings piles in the stream valley.
So I'm thinking maybe these people aren't paying attention to the right places. Because, well, they are.
In the upper reaches of Alder Gulch, we drive through Nevada City with a good-sized train station and cars from all over, including Colorado, a mining camp museum, and a campground. Around the corner, we drove up Main Street in Virginia City, second territorial capital of Montana. You can read all about Sheriff Henry Plummer and his gang of road agents who terrorized the region between here and Bannock, southeast of Dillon in the Grasshopper Valley, and the first territorial capital, but not here. The last clip shows the Virginia City V outlined on the mountain overlooking Main Street.
What they'll call this year Corona.
Like vigilantes and road agents, keep your distance. Yeah, we ate in the Virginia City Cafe when we were here.
There's the courthouse. Is it up there?
Yep. That was where we went in and visited.
As we drove up and over the hills between Virginia City and Ennis, this road cut shows the Eocene and Oligocene volcanic rocks lying directly on Archean gneiss, which you can't see here. The Roadside Geology Montana book talks about, quote, a striking exposure of dark Archean gneiss cut by white pegmatite dikes on the south side of the road, unquote. But we never were able to find this in any of the times we drove this route. Sigh. Eventually, as we started down the east side of the pass, The Madison Range across the broad valley of the Madison River began to show up. Just before we reached the scenic turnout, we could see all the way from the Spanish Peaks at the north end of the range to the glaciated peaks south of the quite distinctive Sphinx Mountain. At the scenic point, I did another pan. According to Roadside Geology Montana, the view shows quite clearly the basin and range topography that began forming around 17 million years ago. I'll quote what the book says about this view. Quote, much of the Madison Range was uplifted in the last 4.5 million years ago as the Yellowstone hotspot became an important factor in the crustal extension in southwest Montana. Standing as a sentinel to the southeast over the Madison Valley is Sphinx Mountain, composed of late Cretaceous conglomerate shed off mountains to the west during late Cretaceous compressional mountain building before either the Madison Valley or the Madison Range had formed. There is also a great view of the immense Cedar Creek alluvial fan, a textbook example of a fan built mostly by streams flowing from glaciers during the Pinedale and Bull Lake glaciations. Modern streams have cut into the fan by as much as 31 feet because the Madison Range has been rising and thereby steepening the fan, unquote.
Stop here someplace?
Yes. Not here, down there.
Okay.
After we left the scenic point to drive down to Ennis, we first passed another outcrop of volcanic rocks. The next two clips take a closer look at the river terraces on either side of the Madison. These are evidence that even though the mountains are rising faster than the valley floor, it is also rising, which forces the river to cut down through the terraces. We'll see more of this in our next road trip when we take US 287 south from Three Forks to Quake Lake, followed by a jaunt over the Continental Divide by way of Reynolds Pass to Island Park in Idaho, then back over Targhee Pass to West Yellowstone, and then finally down the Gallatin River Canyon. As we headed north from Ennis, we got a look at the edge of the Cedar Creek fan with a mountain up the creek that looks like it's giving us the finger. A bit further north, we can see Ennis Lake, and across it, the south end of the Beartrap Canyon. The rocks rising above the lake are Archean basement rocks, mostly gneisses, which have been radiometrically dated to roughly 3.3 billion years old. They are part of the Spanish Peaks and have been raised at least 2.5 miles during the Laramide compressional mountain building. We'll travel through the northern half of the canyon later.
Stream Valley.
Here we've started up Norris Hill, a pass between the Tobacco Root batholith to the west and the Spanish Peaks Archean gneisses to the east. The gravels capping the Archean rocks indicate stream flow was to the south, so they are probably more recent than 4.5 million years ago, when uplift began in this area. We also get another look at Ennis Lake with the Madison Range behind it. On the north side of the pass, there are several long road cuts with dark Archean metamorphic rocks riddled with intrusions of pale pegmatite. I learned the hard way that it's a bad idea to try to capture video of these cuts from right beside them. Better to look ahead at them if possible. The last clip shows a view north near Norris. I'm not sure which mountain range is visible in the distance. We turned east off US 287 at Norris and headed east down Hot Springs Creek toward the Madison River. Most of the outcrops here appear to be tertiary volcanic rocks sitting on top of the 3.3 billion year old Archean gneiss. Talk about a huge gap in time, somewhere around 3.2 billion years. These next three clips take us through what might be called the lower Beartrap Canyon. The river got trapped in the hard Archean rock starting around 4.5 million years ago as the ancestral Missouri flowed north on gravel it had been depositing over the previous 12 million years or so. As the approach of the Yellowstone hotspot started the extensional basin and range development, this extension of the Spanish Peaks began to rise across the path of the river, forcing it to cut through much harder rocks. The Beartrap Canyon between here and the dam upstream is a raging torrent, which makes it a popular place for kayaking and rafting. Even here in the lower canyon, we can see a lot of rafters. The river level is fairly high, even in mid-July, because its level, according to my brother, is controlled at Hebgen Dam, well to the south, both to maintain relatively steady flow through the Ennis Dam for hydropower and for flood control and irrigation up and down the river. It's hard to believe the gneiss we see in outcrops walling in the river and the road is 3.3 billion years old, 3/4 the age of the Earth itself. If we could have stopped, we might have been able to see the banded gneiss and layers of dark rocks loaded with black amphibole. Foliation, the mineral layering, was folded into what looks like a marble cake, because this rock was buried as deeply as 25 miles in the deep past, and the hot rock was more like slush than solid. We've now turned east, away from the Madison River onto the Renova Formation eroded into the Gallatin Valley. We can now see the Bridger Range as we approach our turn onto Churchill Road, headed north. Near the end of this clip, we cross a normal fault, north side down, although there's no evidence on the surface that I can see. It could be called the south-bounding fault of the Gallatin Valley Hole, or Graben, that is dropping between the Spanish Peaks to the south, the Gallatin Mountains to the east, the Bridger Range to the northeast, and the Horseshoe Hills to the north. Churchill Road wiggles around a bit. We headed north, then west, at which point we got a good view of the distant tobacco roots, then north again to see the Bridger Range, followed by a pass through Churchill itself, heading west. Then we turned north again to watch the Bridger Range to the east and the Horseshoe Hills to the north.
This would be Churchill.
Finally, we approached Manhattan from the south to see it backed by the Horseshoe Hills some miles to the north beyond the Gallatin River. The last bit is Broadway, surrounded by trees, then Manhattan Street, and finally our gravelly and bouncy 4th Street. home sweet home, tiny but growing Manhattan, Montana. I hope you've enjoyed this trek around southwestern Montana. See you next time. Phoenix Lady out.